Acclaimed scientist Niels Bohr once said that predictions are quite difficult, especially when they're about the future. Now, while this advice seems quite obvious in comparison to his understanding of the structure of an atom, it's all the more clear that, in fact, hindsight is much easier than that of foresight. And it is because of this morning's Kansas City Star quoted Dan Gleckman, congressman here in Kansas, as saying the United States, in terms of foresight, is always at the edge of foreign policy and global initiatives. And it is because of this, as we find the Obama administration's recent signature of the START Treaty and policy of ending preemptive strikes, it's all the more important to ask ourselves today's timely and significant question. Does the Obama administration's decision to abandon the Bush-era policy of preemptive strikes make us safer? And thankfully, we can say a definite yes for two reasons. First, because it's the right step toward a denuclearized world. And second, because it will only ensure that the United States still has sufficient defense capabilities. First, let's understand why the United States will be the leader in putting us in a more denuclearized world, a necessary initiative for any more safe policy. Primarily, we understand that the United States is at the forefront of policy, especially when it comes to nuclear weapons. As Noam Chomsky, professor of international relations at MIT, wrote in the Harvard Crimson on March 11, 2010, if the United States is not to take a leadership position in denuclearizing the world, the hopes of nuclear nonproliferation will simply be dead. And it is because of this that the United States' recent START Treaty, Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, and policy of ending preemptive strikes will only instill confidence in the international community that a denuclearized world is all the better, which is why the Council on Foreign Relations posited on April 20th, 2010, that moving into the future, the end of the ability to use a preemptive strike only instills confidence that nuclear weapons are not the way of this decade or the coming century. Rather, they are an idea of the past, held over from the Cold War, and that the rest of the world will have confidence to begin to denuclearize. Now, it is because the United States is at the forefront, we moreover understand that in order to have successful policy, this will make the world more safe, also in turn meaning the United States will be safer. As was explained by Jessica Stearns, professor of international relations at Harvard, in Foreign Affairs in March-April 2010, the world's policy is essentially made up of checks in terms of individual nations being able to be secure. As all nations pursue the end of being secure, nuclear weapons are essentially one of these checks. As we look at the nexus between Pakistan and India, both checking each other with nuclear capabilities, if the world is to continue to move in a fashion of denuclearization, as headed by the United States, we will all be more safe, for the principle of mutually assured destruction will still exist. That was the conclusion of Stratford Intelligence Report on April 21st, 2010, stating that mutually assured destruction will not simply disappear as the world's powers like the United States and Russia are looking to decrease their nuclear arsenals to 1,500 or so warheads. And we're promising not to use preemptive strikes, but rather it will still exist to protect us from the future of using these 1,500 warheads to lead us into any sort of nuclear holocaust. So as the United States is taking the first steps to ensure a safer world with less nuclear weapons, the Obama administration's policy of ending the preemptive strike was the right first measure. But let's understand second, from a more domestic perspective, why this does not leave the United States less protected. Primarily, we must look at the United States' capabilities left over after promising the reduction of nuclear weapons. As the Armed Association Control reported on April 2010 in their special brief, the United States still has an unchecked capability to develop missile defense. Missile defense is the critical system that can ensure the United States, while needing comparatively less defense as a result of decreased nuclear weapons, still has a capability to protect ourselves. As it's all the more important for the United States to be in a safer position in the near future, we're not losing all of our capabilities, but rather needing less. Which is why the Washington Post on May 4th, 2010 stated that the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty and the elimination of a preemptive strike is confidence to the international community that the United States has a defensive system, but rather is not looking to use its offensive capabilities. It is because of this, it's all the more important to see that in fact the end of the preemptive strike is turning a page on an old era of fear by the United States, but rather we are now confident in our capabilities with less nuclear weapons. But moreover, this will only ensure that the United States is moving into a new era of preventing the acquisition of nuclear weapons amongst other rogue actors. As John Bellflower, former Army colonel, retired, writing in the Small Wars Journal in fall of 2009, explained, in fourth-generation warfare, essentially we see the recipients of nuclear weapons are in a good position. However, as soon as the United States, Russia, amongst others, take away the ability of using the preemptive strike, we find the world is all the more safe, and we're all the more protected in the critical way. Now, Samuel Huntington, professor at Harvard, writing in his book, The Clash of Great Civilizations and the Remaking of the World Order, explains that as in the world we are faced with a more multiculturalized society in which political and geographic lines are beginning to be blurred by the idea of combating terrorism as an entire globe, it's all the more important to see that today the opportunity is timely to get rid of nuclear weapons and begin the process of denuclearization. For it wasn't that long ago that the Taliban and Al-Qaeda were encroaching on Swat Valley in Pakistan, potentially acquiring the capability of getting nuclear weapons in the hands of terrorists. And Stratford Intelligence Report's conclusion on March 18, 2010, was that nuclear weapons in the hands of terrorists is a far greater threat than nuclear weapons in the hands of the United States, Russia, or any other nation. And it is considering the nuclear spats we faced with other nations that terrorists are the greatest threat. So as we find the denuclearized world would still leave the United States safe, with defense capabilities and less rogue actors, we return to the all-important question of does the Obama administration's decision to abandon the Bush defense policy of preemptive strikes make us safer? The answer is thankfully a definite yes. First, because the United States is taking the first step to denuclearize the world. And second, we still have sufficient defense capabilities to keep us safe at home. So as Jordan Sparks sings in her song, "One step at a time, there's no need to run," we find the Obama administration can heed her advice and that we don't have to run toward nuclear nonproliferation, but rather make the right steps like ending the preemptive strike.
Speaker 110 will be questioned by number 126.
Great speech.
Thank you. You too.
All right, first I'd like to congratulate you on making the final round. That's a huge accomplishment. You did a great job in your speech. I just have a couple of questions for you. Now, in the first area, you talk about the great idea of having less nuclear weapons in the world. But does Obama's treaty actually cause enough consequence on these nations to follow this treaty?
Sure. When we look at the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, which is essentially part of the idea of ending the ability to use the preemptive strike, a cooperation between Russian President Dmitry Medvedev and Obama, we find this is the first step toward a denuclearized world. During the Bush administration, nuclear nonproliferation was just basically an idea floating around there looking to get him reelected in 2004. But Obama's actually taking real action that is moving us in the right direction with other nations, and that does have consequence. For the United States still retains 1,500 warheads and still has the deterrence capability, but rather is the global superpower and needs to lead the globe in the right direction of beginning to denuclearize.
Okay. Now also, because the United States, to put it politely, is starting to lose friends on the international stage, is there enough in the treaty to make sure that other smaller nations that are outside of the global superpowers to stop using nuclear weapons or to stop the pursuit of nuclear weapons in the case of Iran?
Well, actually, I'd argue the United States is beginning to acquire more friends in the international community, as would the Wall Street Journal on June 13, 2010, explaining that Obama has had critical foreign policy successes in terms of gaining more allies. As George Bush's idea of neoconservatism seemingly drove away Europe and the United States' strongest allies in the Middle East, we're now in a situation where the Obama administration sort of has global political clout. As he wooed 250,000 people in Europe before he was even president, the United States is regaining its ability to direct the world with soft power and not only hard power. And specifically with Iran, it is the right step, for if Russia begins to believe in denuclearization, they will hop on board with the United States in pressing the same upon Iran. Moreover, Iran will not need these nuclear weapons to check nations such as Israel, for if the whole world is denuclearized, no actor needs nuclear weapons to check against another.
All right, great job.